Once again, we thank everyone for joining us here today for our speaker series. We are thrilled to be joined by Mark Pankow, who is recently retired from the Ottawa Catholic School Board as a behavior consultant of, we won't say how many years, we'll just say several years and leave it at that. He is been working with our staff here at Rural FASD Support Network, helping us just really understand how to support both our adults and children with FASD, particularly in that around that area of adaptive functioning and some of those other areas, particularly related to self-regulation. And so with that, we do want to acknowledge that we are on the traditional and unceded territory of the Algonquin people, where we work, play, and pray. And so with that, Mark, we turn it over to you.
Okay, thanks, Rob. Try not to look at the screen. I've done hybrid. Well, I haven't done hybrid before. It's either live or it's recorded. So looking in between is going to be a bit of a novel situation. I'm glad, thank you, Rob. I'm glad to be part of your speaker series. I hope you're still at the top of your list of wanted speakers and not at the bottom at this point, but perhaps it's better that I don't know the answer to that. So this is going to be more of an informal chat. I do have slides, and as I was talking to someone a little earlier, the slides I will do my best to follow. In fact, Teresa's here to do my prompts, to look at the slides so that I don't deviate. And part of it, full disclosure, is if you've heard about long COVID, and unfortunately I have long COVID from February, but I have the neurological side. So great excuse to forget my to-do list and all that, but it did have some impact on some memory. So I do refer back to the presentation. We'll try to keep it kind of lighthearted, but we are just talking about why it's important to kind of be able to discriminate between the form of behaviors, and this is specific to behaviors, versus the function. And I think, in my experience, people who are living the experience firsthand are often the experts, whether it's an exceptionality or diagnosis. And my work with people impacted with FASD, families, or students in the case of the education system, I was only one piece of a multi-team approach that supported situations. So this is kind of in a silo. This is as if being able to discriminate functions is the only thing that matters, and it's not. I mean, if it weren't for learning the trauma impacts through our social work staff, our speech and language staff, OT site. So it's really, there's an acknowledgement that this is a collective effort. This is just going to be a thin slice. And I think everyone's kind of, you hear it all the time. I've heard it for years, and the expertise you have living it. The idea, we know it's the tip of an iceberg. We know there are things that are like sending Mark to the corner or back to his room because of something. Probably isn't going to do much to correct or teach a situation. But what we want to be able to do is say, okay, well, we know it's the tip of the iceberg. So what? Then what? So this is kind of taking a look at functions, and it's a bit of a model. It's kind of neat and tidy for functions of behavior. Where does it fit? And I'll try to make it a link. And some of you, this is old school. This is well known to you. So hopefully it's reinforcing that, well, you know what? We can't do everything and be everything, but we can do as much that's well-grounded and thoughtful as possible. So we can take a look at what it means to be able to understand certain functions, and how do we then kind of remediate? How do we do what we do in a way that it's going to bring a little more joy and a little less difficulty to somebody's life. So I'll start with a little quiz. And I mean, this is really not a quiz, but I just want your feedback in terms of. There we go. What did you see? I know it's not always fun. Don't feel obligated to talk either. There's nothing worse. I promise if I make eye contact, it's incidental. It's not meant. Get those eyes off me right now.
I saw someone her smelling the flower and then sneezing after smelling the flower.
Perfect. Same thing, right? Okay. So on that quiz, we're already ahead of the game because the sneeze is just a behavior, right? It's just an action, but you're already looking at causal factors, and that's usually, you know, kind of reinforcing when we show that little clip, because you're already thinking, well, it's not just a sneeze for the sake of a sneeze. So what's the big deal about that? Well, one of the things we know, and there's a lot of research around, is when behavior becomes targeted, not a simple sneeze that is a behavior you can see and you can observe, but when it becomes personalized and explosive, volatile behavior, we tend to freeze in our responses because it freezes us in time. So we only see the behavior. So it's funny when we look at something like a sneeze. Now, if it's a once-off, what are we going to do? We're going to reach for a Kleenex. Done. And it happens again. Oh. Then we realize, well, I'm going through 22 boxes of Kleenex. Maybe I should figure out why I'm sneezing, where I'm sneezing, when it's most likely to happen. So things have to become a little more chronic before we actually are in a position to be able to kind of act on it. So it's not unremarkable that it actually, once it moves into challenging behavior, everything we know, the tip of the iceberg, that there's causal factors, can get frozen. We can blame that on our little walnut in our brain called the amygdala. It kind of messes with us. So our form, that's the sneeze. It's basically what we can see. It's observable. We can measure it. We can hear it. It is what it is. And it's important to know without going, then why does the tip of the iceberg matter? Because when we want to start working with somebody and we want to, for example, around self-regulation, someone who's hitting, and we want that trajectory to go from hitting us to hitting an object, to screaming, and you can see it's sequential and it's a process. So it's important to know what class of behavior. So by class, I mean there's physical aggression, which is unwanted contact with someone else. Might be a kick, a hit, pinch, spit, things like that. So it's important to know what it looks like, because that's going to inform us later. Where do we start? What's our starting point? So don't ignore the what it is or what it looks like, but our focus is on really around the function. And something as simple as a hammer. Let's say the hammer is the form. What are the functions of a hammer? Hit something. Hit a nail. Hurt your thumb. Yeah. A self-injury tool. But think, I mean, the form. It's a working tool. Absolutely. I mean, you think of it like now again, we're going function. It's based on our learning history and our experience. So a whole lot comes into function. It's not the same for all of us. But I've used it to prop old windows. You know, when we had storm windows and everything else, they make a great window prop. When I'm working in the garage and I'm building that birdhouse that I have drawn on a serviette of all things, and I use it as a paperweight. Mm. And geez, I can't get ice in a little lid like this. So hang on, I've got to keep a hammer on every floor. So there's one in the closet there. I've got ice. So again, it shows that something really simple is, okay, how broad? And we all know, and that's the individuality. If you're impacted personally or as a caregiver of someone who has some neurodivergence, looking at the multitude of functions is critical, because they're usually, even though we're going to cut them into little silos, they usually do this. So there's implications for what I hope is where you say, yeah, I'm right on the right track. So this again is, if everybody's pretty clear that the behavior is communication. So what does that mean? We know that it's the tip of the iceberg. Something underlies the behavior. We know that it's not always intentional, in the sense that physical aggression may not be serving that means of just hurting somebody. It could be something totally unrelated. It could be Mark who strikes out. Well, that's an act of physical aggression. But when we begin to look for patterns across time, we say, that's proximal. So someone was in Mark's space. They were in his face and in his space. And that was a lot easier for me to formulate and process the issue and then say, oh, excuse me, Karen, you're in my space. And right now I'm agitated. So my need for personal space has just grown by an extra yard. That's something that I probably wouldn't be aware of as the individual, and as caregivers or those of us who support in different settings outside the home. It becomes really key to see those patterns so that we can start to help in really meaningful ways. The other tricky part, and I don't want to kind of confuse things, but the same behavior can have multiple functions. So as we see, we carve it up. My go-to can be hitting, but that's why we want to really look at some really simple ways to track. Because in one instance, you're in my face, you're in my space, I was hitting. But now Mark has a bag of potato chips, and I wouldn't mind getting my hands on it. I'm going to whack them and take. Same behavior, but very different. This had nothing to do with personal space. I wanted Mark in my personal space because you got what I want. So you're going to treat them very differently contextually. So it just means let's not get caught up on one thing. And from feedback you get, whether it's from the community, often from schools, unfortunately, can be, well, this is what it is. Well, and my question was always, and when I'm in a school, if I were doing an assessment, it was okay, I'm working with my educational colleagues, give me context, because that's just the form of it. And I need to get beyond the form, because we can't fix anything if we don't understand the communicative function. So same behavior can serve different functions, and then different behaviors can serve one function. So again, not to put Mark on the spot, it's just an easy name to say. I kind of like it. Rather nice name in my personal opinion. That's a top speaker list as you start with Mark and you move on from there. But different behaviors can serve one function. So I can say to Mark, I love potato chips. Would you share? That's a behavior serving a function. I can whack Mark and hope he can't run as fast and take the chips. So I can whine. Oh, my mom never gets me any potato chips, and they all serve the same purpose, different behaviors. That's important too. And this actually all comes together really neat and tidy at the end when I'm done trying to make it more complicated. But there's a different way to deal with each. And that's why knowing kind of the class of behavior, not getting stuck, well, it's just physical aggression. Well, to what means and what situation, because we're going to deal with it differently over time when we understand that a little better. Okay, there's my good friend Bart. At face value, form, fairly evident. He's brushing his teeth, right? You can see it, you can measure it, how long. What are possible functions? Oh, we could lose people. I'm unstable, Rob, just so you're aware. The internet is, that is. What are the possible functions of brushing your teeth? Think of the hammer, think big picture.
Good oral hygiene.
Good oral hygiene. So you were told this is good, and you want to keep your mouth clean, your teeth shiny.
To be able to play the video game after you get your teeth done.
Hey, somebody used a little bit of grandma's law. First you eat your peas, then you get dessert, right? Huh? First you brush your teeth, then you get your electronic time. Yeah, absolutely. Could have been sensory, right? Oh, I love the feel on my gums. My teeth don't have much feeling, or unfortunately, if you have sensitive teeth, maybe they do. But the Sensodyne is just lovely. So there could be a sensory point to it. It might be to avoid something. Oh, there's dad again. There's grandma again. There's whomever again. Ragging and nagging. Ragging and nagging. Okay, I know how to get rid of this. Yeah, I'm brushing my teeth.
Yeah.
Okay, so there's again, and some it's just, oh, I love fresh breath. I watch the spearmint commercial. This is so it's got a sensory function, looking for a little attention at the same time. Oh, good, want to smell my breath? Hey, it's all good. So again, different functions are there, and part of this, and part of trying to put humor is, remember, we get stuck. Sometimes when the behavior, this isn't it can become a very volatile behavior. Absolutely, any demand can. But when it is more targeted, again, the idea is we get stuck. So when I talked about the amygdala, that little walnut in your brain, that's our caveman instinct, right? That's the one that goes, I'm out of here, or I freeze, or I fight. The problem, just to kind of, so that people, I'm building my credibility here, Rob, but the idea is that knowing function can reduce that entrapment where we're the deer in the headlights, because we've got this volatile action happening towards us. That kicks in, puts us into kind of fight, flight, or freeze mode. And then the ability to think and react can be really difficult. So sometimes just knowing that, just step back and watch and listen can be a great first step. So this is, you know, and everyone's on a different trajectory, which is always difficult, whether it's a room of professionals, a room of caregivers, people living the experience. This can be a real shift, and some people are well beyond that. You know, you knew that long ago, but I think it's important to kind of look at where we've come with challenging behavior, because 30 years ago it was viewed a certain way, 20 years ago, and then I think in the past 20 years we've really started to come together and say, boy, we really got to rethink this. As we know, the judiciary and other sectors haven't caught up to what I would say is critical and contemporary knowledge in the situation, but we just need to continue to view challenging behavior as a caution sign, right? People are tired, overwhelmed, and that sort of thing. And that's, whether I'm doing a workshop at a school or not, that's usually the message we start with is, okay, look, it's hard to unlearn what we've been taught or experienced, but I think that's critical. And that's really the foundation of the next 15, 20 minutes. So we know function is important by what can happen, and you know, that can add fuel to the fire. So to go back to the bag of chips, if we're moving from someone who's physically aggressive to get chips to just ask, but I don't respond in kind, so I don't use a good strategy. So when we're learning new behaviors, again, this is, I'm really slicing my piece of the pie, knowing it's much broader. But when we're trying to have somebody use their words instead of their behavior in a volatile way, hit, for example, we talk about making sure that that's responded to in kind. In other words, you would share your chips all the time for a set period of time, because you have to build that trust, that relationship that, you know what, you said I don't have to hit to get chips. So it took me months to be able to say, can I have one? You can have the bag. And then we slowly, as that becomes an entrenched response, then we kind of thin it out and say, you know what, how about first, or when you do this, then. But it's a very gradual approach. Nothing's quick. Verbal volleyball, if you've heard that term, that's often by somebody like Mark, responding to somebody who's angry, volatile. Oh, I'm not focusing on function, I'm focusing on behavior because I'm rationalizing or setting limits. So I would like this. Well, you can't have that. Well, you always say no. No, that's not true. So I'm doing all the right things, but because of where it's leading, it becomes volleyball, and it can continue to escalate. So understanding function, and this will make a little more sense in a few minutes. We also we lose sight of the actual cause, and the big issue there is that then it prevents us from remediating, right? How do we prevent? That's our first thing. How do we prevent? What can we eliminate? How do we get rid of triggers? We have to understand function again. And it's like preaching, singing to the choir. That's it, right? I mean, preaching to the converted. I think we all get that. But sometimes we take this is, we sit and listen and chat for part of the morning, and then we want to take it out and push the message out to make sure that we're not the only ones that are trying to view the world and help people from that perspective. So what are the 4 primary functions? And again, they're not neat and tidy, but we'll just kind of break them down and make sense of them. Sensory, escape, attention, and tangible. And this isn't kind of the 1970s or 80s version. This is kind of the new thought on how things are interlinked. So functions of behavior, some people would call it motivation. I just say, so why does it happen? What purpose does it fill? Which is, when I talk about function, I should probably be saying purpose, because the behavior is purposeful, it's functional, it's something people use to attain a means. So we just, the easiest, I mean, for me, particularly having some short-term memory, seat comes in very handy. So sensory, escape, attention, and tangible, and it'll make sense. Sensory. So sensory behaviors are most often automatic. They don't take a lot of thought. They're more kind of a neural response. They can be self-calming. They basically appeal to senses. So, for example, in certain situations, I'll begin drinking more water or coffee. You asked me later if I did it. I probably won't have a sound recall of it, but it was rather automatic. And it would happen if you're here or you're not here. So a lot of sensory things, it's indifferent to a crowd. Now, it might occur more if we're anxious. I know one of the things that was highlighted that I didn't realize for years is when I'm going to certain functions, usually not pleasant ones, and I'm driving, I've got one hand here, and my finger and thumb does this constantly. Like I will drive an hour doing it. I wasn't aware of that until somebody pointed it out. Oh, wonder what function that. Oh, okay, well, this always seems to happen. There is a pattern. Oh, okay. But it's not a negative behavior. It's not a type of thing we're going to really address, but some of it can become more problematic. So this just talks about one aspect of why certain behaviors do occur. Screaming is a good example. Some people scream because they need that auditory input. It's a form of self-stimulation. Some people will run, they seek out jumping activities and things like that. It's important to know because we don't want to eliminate them. If somebody's doing something, if I'm jumping on the table, which I'm sure if I tried to do right now, people would show some anxiety behaviors of their own. If you knew across time, this always happens when Uncle Lou is visiting and Mark is aware of it. He heightens, he jumps on tables. And we can be in the room, we can be out of the room. It doesn't have to, doesn't need other people. It's not attention seeking because he'll go to his room and start jumping on the dresser. Well, we want to work with that later because to eliminate and say you can't do that, it's probably going to make it worse. It's going to heighten. It's going to become forbidden fruit. And because you took something that was being used as self-regulation and a neural response to self-regulation, that's not good. That's a coping mechanism. So we want to start with that. Well, I might move to that and say, well, can I get one of those mini trampolines just as an example, a little safer, still getting the same output. So knowing that function might be sensory tells us, okay, don't eliminate it. If it's not harmful, if it's not, who cares? Like it's people who were flying down the highway, singing at the top of their lungs. It's working for them. So sensory is one reason you see certain behaviors. And again, seeing them across time and context tells you why they might be occurring. And the most important part though is it okay or is it not? And if it's not, how do we then start to put in some more adaptive ways or start teaching. Second in our seat is escape. That's basically avoiding things. You don't like them, they're boring, they're aversive, there's any number of reasons. There's a certain, if you will, class of behaviors that show escape. Some are very obvious, like, I don't want to hear that. Some of them are just, we might call them selective hearing, where, oh, did I say I'd do that? Oh, I forgot. Other behaviors, my workbench example, it's been on a to-do list. I'm very visual. I use my own visual supports. Little check boxes, because boy, I feel good checking off a box. My garage workbench is in the very bottom strategically. I would rather not get my final check mark than go out and do that. And then when I finally say, okay, I've got to check that off, I have to go to town, Mark, you can do this. It doesn't take much to distract me. I will walk out in the yard and go, oh, no, I should pick up some of that brush, actually. My workbench is secondary. I mean, it's covered. I got to work outside. It's a nice day. Could blow in a blizzard in August, and then all my plans would be to no avail. So we experience a lot of volatile behavior when people want to escape a situation. In schools, sensory is a huge issue. That's where sensory and escape come together. This is too bright. This is too loud. There's too many people. I'm out of here. Now that's kind of non-harmful, but sometimes we can become targets, or through self-harm if it's us personally, or just because we're present. So escape and often things like sensory are related. So again, we'll see at the very end, we're not going to spend a lot of time, but we're going to see what are the things we can do proactively? What are things that we can teach later? Anyone have any escape behaviors that you want to share because you think they're really cool, clever, or just unbelievable?
Well, I don't think they're unbelievable, but I think kids refusing to go to school, it doesn't look like an escape because they're not going, but I think it is an escape.
Absolutely, and and it speaks to learning history, and then there lies the patterns. So then how it brings us back though to a question raises a what's that? Then what? Well, what are we going to do to draw kids? That was one of our challenges with kids that were neurodivergent or kids with any exceptionalities. Repetitive bad experiences make it really aversive, and we see them with the tummy ache. So I can't go to school today, or we see it with an explosiveness, and we see it early in a chain. The more severe it is, you don't see it when it's coming to the door to leave. You'll see it when you try to actually wake them up. So that speaks, but that's kind of getting a little off topic. But often escape can take really harmless forms. Sometimes it's okay to let them escape. Don't put the demand on them in the first place, and that way they don't get to practice escaping. Sometimes that's a very viable approach. So escape. The other is attention, and attention isn't the way. I wish we could find a different way to capture it, because it's not attention as in look at me, look at me. Whether the behavior is kind of scary, risky, or whatever, it can be purely negative. It can be to engage you. I want to hit you. I need your attention. I've got to get you close to me. So the word attention can be misleading. All we need to know is it requires an interaction. Our verbal volleyball, right? Now, I've been known to argue with myself, particularly in front of my workbench, about whether it was really that bad or not. That's not attention-based. But if I need to argue with somebody about why it's stupid to do it, and no, it's fine, I know where everything is, that needs another person as part of the interaction, it's attention. And it can be very negative. So again, there's certain responses. We want to be able to, when I'm jumping ahead, but people who engage in a lot of negative behavior, it's an interaction. One of the things we want to look at is the timing of how we interact, when we interact, and are we giving it during all times? And often the question is yes, and then that leads us to some other things that might be going on. So anyway, all this just means this is going to help our planning and the way we troubleshoot situations. It's just a kind of a thought process. And then finally, the last function in terms of the behavior we often encounter is tangible. And tangible just means concrete things, things we can eat, touch, play with, and activities. So it can be an event. So you work to get paid so that you can go to the grocery store and buy a third of what you used to be able to buy. But it's meaningful, and you're trying to actually take something concrete. Sometimes we just hear it through please can I. So you're trying to, again, it's something you want your hands on. We might resort to just again the grab. So you can see when I want Mark's potato chips, a grab and run is a form of tangible. So if I know that, and I'm simplifying things, but if I know, or you're the kind of the behavior specialist, and you say, well, oh no, first of all, here comes Mark with his bag of potato chips. For those who are watching online, by the way, there's two Marks. There's the Mark I'm talking about, and then there's the Mark who's doing the talking. So just to confuse things a little more. But Mark comes in, and he's carrying a bag of potato chips, and Karen looks and goes, oh, Mark's carrying potato chips. I know where this is going. This happens every Saturday, second or third Saturday of the month. And so you've already set the pattern. And Karen sees me walking over and says, oh, Mark, remember when we practiced? You can ask Mark for a chip. Okay, I'll give it a shot. Mark, can I have a chip? And Mark, oh, absolutely, Mark. Here's your chip. So we're remediating it because now we understand the function in this room during this time, and context changes things, which again, that idea that the same behavior might be doing different things in different areas, but that it can be really meaningful. So you can kind of see by knowing the function, or having a bit of a notion what the function is, you can start to teach alternatives. And sometimes it's contrived, it's long, teaching new ways of doing things are difficult, and we have to be focused on replicating as close as we can to the behavior, knowing the path of least resistance. So when you're coming up with alternatives, you've got to give me something that's as easy as grabbing. Grabbing's easy. Formulating kind of verbal behavior to request takes a lot. So I wouldn't even insist, and Karen, knowing her craft, no, she's not going to say, okay, go up to Mark, say, Mark, may I have a chip, please? You just walk up, Mark, chip. That's where we're going to start, because that's, in terms of ease, that's a little closer to grabbing than formulating a big sentence. So again, all I'm trying to do is connect the function to what we might be able to do when we see the patterns. So for your viewing pleasure.
Hi. I have soy milk. The doctor says the real kind could kill me. I wish I
Sorry.
was interesting like you. You're funny. I am? Yeah. And the world needs a clown. Duty. Bugger. That is killer material. Skinner is a nut. He has a rubber butt.
Young man, I can assure you my posterior is nothing more than flesh, bone, and that metal plate I got in Nam. Now, I want you to knock off that potty talk right now.
The principal said potty.
You listen to me, son. You've just started school, and the path you choose now may be the one you follow for the rest of your life. Now, what do you say?
Eat my shorts.
All right, I'll eat your shorts.
Yeah, eat my shorts. Butt man. Butt man.
Butt man.
What?
So before we move on from that, what was the function of our 7-minute discussion on functions? We all have expertise now, but that one's, I think, reasonably clear. Attention? Yeah, absolutely, attention. right? And that's often how it forms. And you can see the behavior. I was trying to show something that was, for all eyes sometime, but it did show kind of an intensification. And then there was a decision-making point, and that gets into it. That's a different speaker series talk, but the competing values of pure attention or, I really want to remove this influence right now. But he made a particular choice, right? Because that was much more powerful. And it often is for kids, adolescents, teenagers.
What
What
to
about-
feel like you belonged,
Yeah.
because that was the point at the beginning.
Yeah.
The world needs a clown.
And huge connection, right? That social acceptance. Okay, well, a little bit of aversiveness over here, or lots of positive feedback. So what would we do if we knew the function was attention? Okay, Bart loves attention. How do we give him attention? How can we give him an audience, but in a more appropriate, or at least start sliding on the continuum? And there are ways. We actually, we've got jokes of the day where we bring someone who does that in school, bring them up so that they can entertain for a little bit, and they get lots of reinforcement, social reinforcement, because it's important. It feeds them, it brings them joy. So we don't want to eliminate it. We just want it to be less conflictual. What about Skinner, Principal Skinner? He engaged in a behavior we can kind of put into a silo. What did he do? Yeah, he was authority. And if we look at kind of the seat, if we go back and look at seat, was it sensory? I mean, maybe the noise, but he didn't look like it. It was type of noise that he was probably, but that wasn't it. What about escape? Avoid. He kind of picked Bart up and it was out of here. I'm not, like, this is not happening. I'm not staying in this situation. I'm not going to be ridiculed and showed up by a kindergarten student in this clip. So he engaged in a particular behavior. And again, if he were the person we're focusing on, we'd be saying, okay, so then what? And that's what really is important about getting a handle on some of the functions, or at least a notion. So we know behaviors, communications. We've got to look below the tip of the iceberg. And most of us know that, but what do we do with it? We know the behavior is purposeful, it's serving a function. We don't have to like it, but we have to acknowledge it's meeting a need. And how do we not just strip that need away? It's not going anywhere, but what do we do to allow it to occur, in a way that's a little easier on everybody? And form, we know form and function don't always equate. We know that the same behaviors can form different functions. Different behaviors can serve one function, and that tracking is really important, especially when you're dealing with volatile situations, or if it's me personally trying to understand why did I do that? Because we really beat ourselves up when we have behaviors that are very difficult for others and for ourselves. And sometimes trying to get a handle on our own being is a huge challenge for us, but it can also be a huge difference maker. And it's all about, again, the only reason we're talking about function is because it is empowering. It does give us another tool to understand why we do things in a different way. And we don't care what, there's enough pressure about what are other people thinking? What are they, they're looking at us. And then, well, I can't use a Bart comment. So what? I mean, it isn't as easy as a so what, but I'm going to do what I know is right because Mark Pankow was a speaker and he said that's what we should do. So we'll blame him if it goes south. So a little detective work, and it's much easier. Somebody who's had to respond to crisis situations and gets called in the aftermath of serious events. It's really important to step away, because in the moment, sometimes it's just, okay, Mark, say nothing. give them a little more space, give the person time and space. You don't have to try to solve it, and you don't want to play verbal volleyball. And that's all I can do is muster up. Don't create an escalation. But the detective piece is so critical, knowing when did it occur, where did it happen, under what context. So the ABCs are, and again, this isn't going back to 70s and 80s BMOD or things like that. This is just something that really becomes empowering for people. And it helps us tease out circumstances. And I'm sure we can all give examples. Well, I can guarantee you this is the way I would respond in this situation. This is how I act in this situation. But we break things down into what's going on in the world in a micro sense before something explosive or problematic happens. Because our first goal is to identify, and that's often too where we'll identify and assess and say, oh, okay, they're doing this because, oh, okay, so we need to teach alternatives. We need to match it close to where they're functioning now. So, and I'll give a couple of quick examples towards the end. But antecedents, and when I track even my own tendencies or professionally, it's point form. So, where did, so basically antecedents, everything that come before the behavior. So if I knock my water bottle off, the antecedent would be the location. So we were in the church meeting room, conference hall, whatever. There was a video on, the lighting was bright, environmental factors. There were other people around the setup. You don't have to get too minute. Sometimes less is better, but it's all the things that over time, like we wouldn't fill out an ABC for one event. We see it across time where there might be more occurrences, and then that's when we pick patterns apart. So, and I'm going to give a concrete example. Behavior, again, it's form. It's important to know the form because the form will help inform us as to how do we teach some alternatives, how to replace, and that's based on a lot of information. This isn't a one-off. So if I'm working, again, in my multidiscipline team, with the OT talking about sensory, my social work psych colleagues, there are a lot of instruments that go into this. This is just about what we can do and observe. We're not going to conduct the psych ed assessment, the speech and language, or the OT sensory assessment, but this is about how we can observe the actual behaviors we're facing or we're engaging in. And then consequences, that's not go to the corner or this. That's just what happens the minute the behavior stops. Like what's happening in the environment. And you can see that, for example, to use a sensory situation, if I'm feeling overwhelmed in a crowd and the lighting and all that, I'm just feeling like everything is just magnified. I hightail it out of here. That's the behavior. And then my consequence, I'm in a quiet spot. I'm in Tim Hortons drive-through. So I've made something better. I've escaped a situation. I've tried to make it better. So consequences don't imply negative inherently. So when we see patterns, we've done this 5 times, we see that every time that say there's English work to do or language arts, written output, and that's that's a trigger. Well, we're going to try to first, we're not going to push through it. We're going to create more opportunities for volatility. We're going to reduce or eliminate those demands. As long as we can say, yeah, there is a correlation. There is a reason Mark has a meltdown every day at this time and darts out of a certain location, whether it's home or school. But we need to know what those are because we're first going to try to eliminate, and we're going to use prompting or coaching, visual supports like the transitional warnings. My task list is a great idea. Like I do the checkbox. I would not be able to complete a list without it. So by knowing these patterns, then we're going to start to, again, when it's happened a few times, never a once off, we're going to be able to start making some changes. So already we're feeling powered. Okay, wow, I know what happens most likely during this, which means this is the skill. We're seeing the grab and run. We're gonna work on requesting, making it freely available to eliminate. The behavior is the behavior, and then the consequences. Again, we measure the response, so it can be, wow, I like the way you did that. That's great. That was, we get out of the car after a practice drive. That's great, even though we're going, oh my goodness, that was an event unto itself. We give praise, right? Because it was the initiative. We're reinforcing that behavior. We'll use coaching. Sometimes we'll coach at the front end as prompting. Okay, here's what we can do. And sometimes we'll coach in the moment. Again, the idea that the response is if there is challenging behavior or problem behavior, there has to be a negative response is not at all the case. It can be just checking for understanding. It can be providing a safe place, a safe person, a chill spot that we would have actually introduced as a nanny seed. So some of these things would be taught as, hey, you know what? It's okay to get mad. In a true situation, we have somebody who is a door rearranger, if you will, both school and home, where the door was the target, either through the glass or in their home through the door. And so we started by actually putting up a gym mat at both locations. It's okay. You want to go in and close your door, but this is how we do it. That was a starting point. You're still doing all kinds of real teaching as part of it. You can change the environment. And I know if you have been through the school process, I have to believe that no one has had to deal with things. I mean, we want alternative responses. We want them, first of all, to be taught proactively at the front end. We also want to know what the response is. I mean, you can escalate it from a bad situation to worse if you do this, and that. But we can do a lot of things in response when we see somebody up here. Sometimes it's just leaving people to their own veil, so we don't feed a situation. So you can kind of, this ties it together, and that's all I'm going to say after this. I'll take a couple questions. They're not too specific because I don't want to go out on a limb and try to lead somebody with limited information, but this kind of takes everything together in a 3-minute clip and just kind of highlights it. And it's recorded, so you can have a look at it. And Amanda Kelly, I had a chance to meet her. She was speaking in Kingston. She's a real cool person. She's from Hawaii. Came to Kingston in February, and she didn't quite enjoy it as much. I'm saying, is it ever balmy along Lake Ontario when it's not frozen? Balmy. 36 hours ago, I was in Honolulu. Okay. She's also an environmentalist, by the way. She was one of the first ones to lobby US to eliminate plastics, and Hawaii was one of the first states to eliminate straws, and she was very sensitive to that. Anyway, so just to quickly tie it together, we all know that the behavior is the tip of the iceberg. Going one step further and then saying, well, what function is it serving is a next step, because if we can determine the function through just ABC tracking and obviously working with clinicians, working with other support people, because it's much more in depth than just doing ABC. But as an individual, I'm empowered to do an ABC. It's very informative. And then that can help me tell me what the function is. Well, in this environment, it is escape. How do we allow escape, but not in a harmful way to others? If it's sensory, how do we provide that sensory input? We don't want to eliminate it. It's a need. How do we accommodate? So, we start with, we deal with it. We look for patterns through our ABC. If we can get a function, now we can really empowered as caregivers, as people in kind of in a therapeutic role, we're really empowered to do some good things from it. It's really just kind of, if you think back to those little medical maps, the diagnosis, if you have this symptom, yes, go here. And if you have this or this happening, go here. It's a kind of a decision tree. That's what this really does, if we can start identifying some functions. And they do this. So for example, attention can also have escape attached to it, right? I'm going to be a goof and a class clown because I want you to say, out you go, Mark. Oh, no math today. This is a good day. So again, we've cut it into silos. It does do this, and that's okay. We just look at, well, how is it used in this situation? How is it used in that? So this is really meant to be empowering. This just ties it together. Half hour of Pankow talk. I want to go back because I was afraid to click off to get that menu off because it would blow up the presentation. And I didn't want Rob coming through and tripping over a chair and then he'd be off work. So that was just my method of being thoughtful. But the bar under the attention, there was something that you couldn't see, and it's important. And it was the last strategy, and it said, ignore the behavior, not the person. And I saw that was one of the key messages, because sometimes we either misspeak, and I'll for myself, and I say, oh yeah, well, just ignore. But I don't ignore an individual. Right? There's different ways to show empathy from a distance. Your express doesn't mean turn your back and not validate. I did want to point that out. So that's basically the summary. Is you know, knowing it's a tip of the iceberg is just the starting point. Trying to understand what's under it from a functional perspective. What does it serve? We don't try to solve everything at once, but it's really a great pathway to question things. And the other big piece, just to wrap up, is the, now I forgot my point, that's my COVID brain. Once we're able to start remediating it, we have what we call the momentum factor. Things get easier. It's usually that first element of change when we're trying to address a function, but it is very empowering and it's pretty remarkable. And back to my point, since I was trying to recover that, it depersonalizes it. Because just a little stat, but I used to do some lectures at Queen's and Faculty of Ed, and one of the things that I was really shocked to find, and this was in the 2000s, that 1 in 5 young people, so people who just went to school to become a teacher, invested their 5 or 6 years, they leave within 5 years. And it has nothing to do, 1 in 5, and it's higher now, but I don't have the stats, so I go on, and this is going back to the mid 2000s. 1 in 5 new people will quit within 5 years. It has nothing to do with the new math curriculum. It's not about the government issues or things like that. It's about when you step in front of a room, the needs that you want to support, you're sometimes not always in a position to meet that. And so we can't, I mean, we know with the stress that you encounter, we encounter, you can't always, you don't always have that option. Sometimes it is just a reality. But knowing when you're on the receiving end of some hostile words, actions, social media, things like this all happens in so many ways, know there's a function. And even though it might be, Mark, you saw it off, blah, 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 blah. Oh, okay. There's a function to that. It's not really about what I just heard. So allow yourself to depersonalize it because it's functional, it's serving a purpose. And that purpose isn't always focusing on the behavior itself. Sometimes we have to just go under the iceberg. So having said that, and because I have to run to the airport, that's basically it. So what are the things I did say, if I did run into a time constraint, I know there could be some questions, so I can take 1 or 2, and then unfortunately really do have to pick up a child and get them off and running. But Judith from the office from the rural FASD, have you met folks yet?
Pretty
Yes,
much,
pretty
except for a couple.
Okay.
Thank you. I was at.
So thank you very much, Mark.
Yeah.
Thank you. But Judith would collect. I'm back at the office for some brainstorming sessions this week. So if there are some things that come up, Judith is here. She can certainly take them. But is there anything in general, it can't be personal about, okay, this is what we're dealing with, because I can't go there without, like, you need a full assessment.
So thank you very much. So Mark, thank you very much. We're at, actually, I'm going to get the recording to stop first before we enter into the questions there. So first of all, a couple of things that I can share with you. Number one, I can absolutely assure you that you're in a tie for first with 9 other people for our number 1 speaker that we wanted as part of the series this year. So so that would be the first item I would say. There you go. So the other one too, though, is when I was watching your presentation, the 2 things that I think that stood out the most from my perspective was, number one, how simple, I don't want to say simple, but easy to understand. Some really, like you said, explosive and complex concepts here. When we look at, behavior and some of the things that we deal with and in some of those environments and situations that we find ourselves in sometimes. I found this presentation to be extremely helpful, easy to follow, and really give us some initial thoughts of where that next step is and where we can begin. And so we very much appreciate your ability to communicate in that fashion, to be able to take those complex concepts and describe them in ways that I think all of us can understand. And then the other one is I'm walking away with hope that there are this is doable. And again, that even when you do a tweak, I like the idea of how you said that all functions are interlocking with each other. And if you can even adjust just one thing in one spot, the ramifications and the impact that has on everything else, then you'll see that through all of it. And so I know sometimes for us, life can seem very overwhelming, and to know that, you know, the solutions potentially are not all that overwhelming, that it can be at times even that simple tweak. So thank you for giving us, thank you for sure for giving us that feeling of hope and recognizing there are things to do moving forward. So once again, to the rest of our speakers, to the rest of our audience, we thank you once again. We have already confirmed it this month that for next month, we are once again joined by our annual guest, Santa Claus, next month. And so so Mark, that's a really hard one to follow. I will say that. So, but anyways, we do look forward to seeing everyone next month as well.